Feel your shoulders right now. Where are they? Are they sitting somewhere up near your ears? Is there a tightness across your chest that has been there so long it almost feels like a permanent part of you? Before I say anything else, I want you to take one breath, slowly. Not a performance of breathing, not a conscious technique, just one real breath in and let it go. And as that breath moves through you, I want you to notice something you may have stopped noticing. Somewhere in your body right now, there is a bracing, a low, quiet readiness, like some part of you is still holding the line, still watching the horizon, still keeping a small piece of itself in reserve, waiting for the next thing to come against you. That feeling has a name. It is called survival mode. And it did not show up because something is wrong with you. It showed up because you went to war. Not the kind that gets talked about in the news. Not the kind that anyone outside your own private life would necessarily understand or recognize. The kind that is fought in the silence of your own days, in the longest nights, in the seasons when you were holding on to something you could not see, but could not bring yourself to release, and you kept going, day after day, week after week, through seasons that stretched longer than any season has a right to stretch. You kept going. And I want you to know that I see that. Not the performance of it, not the face you put on for other people. The actual choosing, in the quiet, to not let go. By the time this message is over, chosen one, you are not just going to understand what this season is. You are going to understand who you are inside of it, and that is going to change something in you at a level that a shorter conversation could not reach. There are signs already happening in your life right now, signs that are telling you exactly where you are on this journey. I am going to name every one of them before this message is over, but before I get there, there is something more important I need to say first. Something the battle may have slowly, quietly taken from you, and I want to give it back. The battle is over, chosen one. Not almost over, not shifting, not entering a new phase, over. The particular war that has been waged against your peace, against your calling, against your ability to believe without bracing, against your capacity to trust that something genuinely good is still possible for you. That war ended, and you are standing on the winning side of it. I know that may not land the way you thought it would. I know that for some of you, something inside just pushed back. It does not feel over. The circumstances look the same. You are still waiting on things you have been waiting on for a long time. And you are not sure how someone who does not know your life can say what I just said with any confidence. I hear that. And I am not going to talk you out of what your eyes can see. But there is something specific about the way a chosen one experiences victory, something fundamentally different from how most people expect victory to feel. And understanding it is one of the most important things I could ever share with you. I am going to walk you through it in this message. And by the time I do, you are going to understand yourself in a way that the whole middle of the battle made impossible. But first, I need to sit with you for a moment. Because before we talk about what is coming, the soul needs something. It needs to have its story witnessed. And I want to do that for you now. I do not know the specific shape of your battle. I do not know if it was a relationship that ended in a way that still does not make sense, or a dream that was real and alive and then went quiet in a way that felt like loss, or a season of financial pressure that wore you down from the outside while you were still trying to hold yourself together from the inside. I do not know if it was your health or your family, or a calling that felt so clear and then so delayed that you started to wonder if you had imagined the whole thing. But I know what prolonged warfare leaves behind in a person, and I want to name it. Not to pull you back into the pain, but to honor it. Because your soul needs its story acknowledged before it can be released. There was a night, maybe more than one, You know the one I mean. It was late. Everyone else in your world was somewhere else, doing other things, and it was just you, alone, with the same situation you had been going over for weeks, for months. You were not panicking. You were past panic. You were in that deeper, quieter place that comes after panic fades, when you are just sitting in the weight of something unresolved and going over the same questions again, looking for the angle you might have missed, the answer that would make it make sense. And no new answer came, just you and the dark and the ceiling of your hope pressing down a little closer than it had the night before. You know that night, and there was a moment, I believe there was at least one, when you were right at the edge, when the thing you had been holding on to for so long felt so distant and so heavy that releasing it seemed like the only kind of mercy left. You were that close. The logic for letting go was right there, making complete sense, and some part of you could feel the relief of it, the imagined relief of just being done with believing for something that kept not arriving, and something in you said no. Not loudly, not with a speech, not with renewed confidence or a fresh wave of inspiration, just a quiet, exhausted, stubborn no. And you reached back in and held on one more time. Not because you had a reason that would satisfy anyone looking from the outside, not because something changed, but because somewhere deeper than your exhaustion there was something that was not finished yet. Something that refused. That was not weakness. What you did in that moment was one of the most extraordinary things a human being can do, and most people will never understand the cost of it. There is also the experience of watching, of being someone who is genuinely trying, genuinely positioned, genuinely doing everything you know to do, and watching people around you, people who seem less prepared, sometimes less committed, sometimes less clear about what they are even moving toward, and seeing them move forward, getting the thing, receiving the breakthrough. Stepping into the season you have been standing at the edge of for what has started to feel like forever. That has a particular ache to it, not a petty ache, not jealousy in the small sense. The deeper ache of someone who is genuinely trying and genuinely wondering if the universe has simply reorganized its plans without notifying you. That wondering was real, and it deserves to be named, because it took something from you to keep trusting past it. And then there is the version of yourself you left behind somewhere in the middle of all of this. The simpler version. The one who had not yet learned what it feels like when something or someone you counted on does not come through. The one who had not yet developed that particular layer of guardedness that only comes from being genuinely disappointed. You cannot get back to that person. That version was finished by the experience. And that is a form of grief that almost nobody talks about, the grieving of a simpler self. A self that did not yet carry the weight of knowing what this kind of season can take. You are allowed to grieve that. And finally, and I say this one with the most care, there is the particular, grinding exhaustion that comes from sustained faith. Not the exhaustion of one hard week or one painful event, the kind that builds slowly over months or years, of choosing to believe past the place where belief feels natural. When faith stops being inspiring and starts being just the discipline you practice. Because stopping would cost more than continuing, but it stopped feeling like a gift a long time ago. When the prayers feel like they are going into a ceiling, when worship feels like going through the motions on the outside, while the inside is just quiet and tired. When you have sat with enough unanswered questions that you have stopped asking them out loud, not because you found the answers, but because you ran out of energy to hold the questions. That exhaustion is not a spiritual failure. That exhaustion is the evidence that your spirit has been doing the most demanding kind of work for a very long time without adequate rest. And I need to stop right here and say this to you directly. Not as a comfort that glosses over what actually happened, as a truth that I want to land somewhere real. You are not broken. You are not behind. You have not been passed over. You have not been forgotten. You are not someone who missed something or failed some test that everyone else quietly passed. You are someone who went through something real, something that would have ended most people's belief much earlier. And you are still here, still seeking, still trusting, even when trusting feels like the most unreasonable thing you could do. That is not ordinary. That is not a small thing. And that is exactly why this message found you today. Now, let me tell you something that almost no one prepares the chosen one for. Something that the stories of victory rarely include. Something that I believe you are in the middle of right now and may not have had words for until this moment. When a long battle finally lifts, when the particular pressure that has been against you begins to ease, it rarely feels the way you imagined it would when you were in the middle of it. In the stories, victory has a clear sound, a recognizable before and after. A moment where the music swells and the weight lifts, and you know, without question, that you have arrived on the other side. And that version of victory exists. It is real. But in the kind of battle you have been in, the kind that goes on across seasons and months and years, the ending is almost always quieter, more gradual. And sometimes, for a while, it just feels strange, because the armor is still on. Your nervous system, the part of you that learned to scan for what was coming, that learned to keep a portion of yourself always slightly ready, always slightly braced, that learned that dropping your guard could be costly. That system does not turn off the moment the threat lifts. It is extraordinarily good at its job, and its job is to protect you. The only problem is that it does not automatically know when the season has changed. So it keeps doing what it was designed to do. It keeps bracing. And when you are still braced in a room that is finally safe, peace does not feel like peace. It feels suspicious. It feels too quiet. And every time something genuinely good shows up in your life, some quiet part of you waits for what is wrong with it, waits for the catch, waits for the thing that is going to take it away before you have a chance to actually receive it. That is not a lack of faith. That is a nervous system being completely loyal to the lesson it learned from a real experience. The problem is not that the lesson was wrong. The problem is that the lesson belongs to a season that is now behind you. Think of someone who has been in a genuinely difficult season for a long time, someone who learned that staying alert was how they stayed safe. When the difficulty lifts, the alertness does not immediately follow. The body holds the posture of the last season, even as the circumstances begin to shift. And the transition, moving from a posture of warfare into a posture of receiving, is one of the most disorienting things a person can go through. Not because the danger returns, because the body does not immediately believe it has left. This is not a problem with you. This is not a spiritual immaturity. This is what it looks like to be a human being who has been through something long and real and hard. And understanding this one thing, truly understanding it at a level that changes how you treat yourself in this season, may be the most important gift this message gives you. Because the version of the chosen one who cannot receive what they won is not a victorious one. And I want something better than that for you. There is something specific about what happens inside a chosen one when a long battle ends, something that shapes this strange in-between feeling, and I am going to explain it fully in this message. But right now, before I go further, I want to show you something that is already happening, Something you may have been noticing and not fully trusting. There are signs, and they are already in your life. And once I name them, you will see them. But before I do that, I want to ask you to make a small decision. If you have been listening to this message and you have recognized yourself in what I have described, if the exhaustion landed somewhere true, if the almost letting go felt familiar, if something in you has been quietly resonating with the idea that your season is shifting, but you just cannot fully feel it yet, I want to ask you to stay with this message all the way through. Because what I am going to walk you through in the sections ahead is not a general encouragement, it is a specific framework. I am going to name 7 signs that are already in your life right now that confirm exactly where you are. I am going to explain what the battle actually did to your brain and why that matters more than you might expect. I am going to give you 3 specific sacred assignments for this season, things that are not about pushing forward, but about receiving what you already won. And at the very end of this message, I am going to speak something over your life directly, something I have been building toward from the first sentence. That closing is the reason this message was put together, and it is meant specifically for the person you are right now. Do not leave before we get there. Now, let me show you the signs. The first sign is the quality of the silence around your situation. It has changed. Not completely, not in a way that is easy to put into words. But if you pay close enough attention, the silence that surrounds the things you have been waiting on has a different texture than it did before. It used to carry something heavier, a dread, a low hum of something pressing against you, a sense that the quiet was just the pause between waves. And now, without anything obvious changing in your circumstances, the silence feels different. Not empty, anticipatory, like the quiet before something arrives, rather than the quiet that comes from something being absent. If you have noticed that even once, even for a moment, that is a sign. The second sign is the way grief is moving through you now. In the thick of the battle, grief was resistance. It was a holding on, a protest, a refusal to let the hard thing be fully real. But lately, something in the grieving has shifted. There are moments when you feel something release, and it actually releases. Not completely, not without ache, but there is a quality of genuine letting go that was not available to you for a very long time. Something is moving through rather than staying stuck. That movement is healing. The third sign is that old anger has begun to settle, not gone, not buried, in a way that will eventually surface with more force. Just quieter. The particular anger that the battle produced, the frustration of the waiting, the sting of things that were not fair, the heat of feeling overlooked in seasons when you knew what you were carrying. That anger is beginning to cool into something calmer, something that still knows what happened, still holds the full memory of it, but no longer needs to keep it at the surface. That settling is not resignation. That is something beginning to heal. The fourth sign, and I want you to feel this one slowly, is that you are beginning to think about the future in a new way. Not with the anxious calculating of someone who is managing outcomes they cannot control. Not with the fear planning of someone who has learned to brace for disappointment, but with something more like curiosity. Small, quiet, tentative moments where you catch yourself imagining what is coming and the image is not threatening. Where the future, even without being clear, feels like it might hold something worth moving toward. That is new. Even if it only lasts 10 seconds, even if it flickers in and then retreats. The presence of that curiosity where there used to be only bracing is a sign. The fifth sign is that things are landing differently in you now, not that you have gone numb. Not that you have stopped caring or stopped feeling, but the charge on things has shifted. Situations and people and words that used to knock you completely sideways are finding a more settled place inside you. You are recovering faster, processing in less time. The armor is still there, but it is not the only thing you have access to. There is something underneath the armor now, something steadier. Something that does not fully shatter when it gets hit. The sixth sign is the return of an appetite, maybe for something specific, a creative interest that the battle pushed out of your life, a connection you have been meaning to reach back toward, a way of spending time that used to bring you genuine joy before the season required all of your energy just to survive. Or maybe the appetite is less specific than that. Just a returning sense that there are things ahead worth looking forward to. A small pulse of interest in what comes next, not born from obligation or willpower, but rising naturally from somewhere inside. That appetite is your soul beginning to believe something. Beginning to believe that the next season might actually hold something good. And souls that have been in the kind of battle you have been in do not begin to believe that casually. That return of appetite is significant, and the seventh sign is the quietest one, and it is the most important one. Something inside of you has been whispering, not loudly, not with announcement or fanfare, just a low, soft, persistent signal sitting underneath the noise of everything else. And the message of that signal is not a warning. It is not telling you to brace. It is not telling you something is coming against you. It is saying something you may have been almost afraid to trust. It sounds like it is time. Not time to fight. Not time to prepare for another wave. Not time to evaluate or calculate or get ready for the next thing to come against you. Just time. Time for something to arrive. Time for something that has been on its way for a while to finally, fully land. Time for the door you have been standing at to open. If you are hearing that whisper, even faintly, even buried under all the noise of your days, that is not wishful thinking. That is not self-deception. That is the most trustworthy part of you telling you something true. And learning to trust that whisper, to lean into it rather than talk yourself out of it, is part of what this season is asking of you. Every sacred tradition, every wisdom lineage, every story of transformation across time has a name for this space. The space between the battle and what comes after it. Between the wilderness and the promised land. Between the fighting season and the receiving season. Some call it the threshold. Some call it the Selah, a word written into the ancient songs that means stop, pause, let it breathe. Some describe it as the rest that follows battle, and they are very clear that this rest is not weakness, not spiritual vacation, not falling behind. It is the most sacred form of active work that a chosen one can do. The figures who walked before you knew this space better than almost anything else they walked through. There was one who experienced the greatest moment of his calling and then collapsed the very next day, completely alone, completely depleted, asking to be done with it all. There was one who was promised a kingdom and spent years in wilderness doing the work of becoming the person who could carry it. There was one who survived betrayal, abandonment, and years of circumstances that made no visible sense, and who eventually looked back and could only say, what was intended for harm was, the whole time, moving toward something good. Those stories are not just ancient history. Those stories are the map for the journey you are on. And I am going to walk you through each of them in this message. But I know what is sitting in most of you right now, because I know the question this kind of conversation always raises. The honest one. The one underneath the theological language and the spiritual framing. If the battle is over, why can I not feel it? That question deserves a real answer, and I want to give you one. An answer that is not just comforting, but actually explanatory. One that will change how you understand yourself in this season and how you treat yourself inside of it. That answer is what the next section of this message is entirely about, and it is going to come from somewhere you might not expect. Stay with me. Why can I not feel it? I want to stay with that question for a moment, because it deserves more than a quick answer. It deserves honesty. The truth is, when a battle has gone on for a long time, the ending almost never announces itself the way we imagine it will. There is no bell, no clear signal, no dramatic before and after where you can point to a single moment and say, that is where the war ended and the peace began. More often, the shift is quiet. It is gradual. It happens in the margins of your ordinary days before it becomes visible in your circumstances. And the person standing closest to it, the one who has been most faithful, who has carried the most, who has stayed in the posture of belief past the point where most people would have stopped, that person is often the last one to feel that the thing they were holding on for has already begun to arrive. This is not a spiritual problem. It is not a gap in your faith. It is not a signal that you are doing something wrong or that something is still working against you. This is what happens when a human being has been through something real, something long, something that required everything they had for longer than any season has a right to require. And I want to explain it to you, clearly, in a way that I believe will be one of the most genuinely relieving things you have heard in this entire season. I told you earlier that there is something specific about the way a chosen one experiences victory. Something completely different from what most people expect when they imagine what winning feels like. Here is what that is. The very qualities that carried you through the battle, the vigilance, the hyper-awareness, the ability to stay alert to what was coming, the endurance that kept you moving when everything in you wanted to stop. Those are the exact same qualities that make it difficult to stop bracing when the battle ends. Because here is what the body learns during prolonged warfare. It learns to scan, to watch the edges, to keep some portion of itself always slightly ready, always positioned for the next thing, always holding a quiet measure of tension in reserve, not as a flaw, not as a failure. Because in the battle, that was the right response. Dropping your guard had consequences. Your body learned that lesson deeply and faithfully, the way bodies learn lessons that matter for survival. Now, the battle is over, the threat has lifted. But the lesson is still running, the scanning is still happening, the bracing is still present, and this is why peace, when it begins to arrive in your life, can feel suspicious. Why stillness feels more like waiting than like rest. Why every quiet moment gets interrupted by some low-level part of your nervous system that keeps asking, is this real? Should I trust this? Is the next thing already on its way? That is not weakness. That is your body being extraordinarily faithful to a lesson you actually needed. The difficulty is that the lesson belongs to a season that is now behind you, and the system has not yet been updated with the news. Let me tell you what the science says about this, and then let me tell you what the sacred has always known about it. Because they are pointing at the same thing in two different languages, and when you hear them together, something tends to shift. When a person lives under sustained pressure, real ongoing pressure over months or years, something specific happens in the brain. The systems that are designed to detect danger become more sensitive, more reactive. The threshold for what gets registered as a threat gets lower. The nervous system essentially learns to work harder and faster and with more vigilance than it was originally designed to maintain over a long period of time. And the part of the system that is supposed to eventually say, "You are safe now, you can stand down," that part gets quieter, slower to respond. less able to override the learned vigilance with a new signal. Scientists have a technical name for this process, but in the language of this message, I want to call it something simpler. I want to call it the lag. The lag is the gap between when the battle ends and when the body believes it. And what I most need you to hear about the lag is this: it is not a character flaw. It is not a spiritual immaturity. It is not a sign that you have not grown or that your faith is insufficient. The lag is simply the human body being exactly what it is, a system that was built to protect you, doing its job with complete loyalty, even slightly past the point when the job is actually done. And here is the part that matters most. The person who has been in the most intense and sustained season of warfare will, almost always, have the most significant lag. Not because they are the weakest, because they carried the most. Your lag is proportional to what you went through, and what you went through was real. So the same grace you would extend to anyone else who had been through something real, the patience you would offer a friend who was still recovering from something that cost them deeply, I am asking you to extend that to yourself, right now, in this season, not as a reward for surviving, as a response to the truth. Now, I told you a moment ago that the sacred has always known this, and I want to show you where. Let me tell you about a man who had the greatest victory of his life, and then collapsed the very next day. His name was Elijah. And if you know his story, I want you to set aside for a moment what you already think you know about it. I want you to hear it fresh, the way it actually reads, without the religious framing that sometimes flattens the humanity out of it. Elijah was a prophet, which means he was someone who carried something that most people around him could not see or understand. He operated on a level that his world was not always ready for. He had a clarity of calling that was both his gift and, in many ways, the source of his most profound loneliness. And there was a moment, a specific moment, a public confrontation on a mountain called Carmel, where Elijah did something that by any measure should have been the defining experience of his entire life. He stood on that mountain in front of hundreds of people who had spent years opposing everything he stood for, and he prayed, and fire came down from the sky, not as a metaphor, as an event. Something happened that nobody in that crowd could explain away or deny, and the nation turned. The people who had been going in the wrong direction turned around. The thing Elijah had been holding on for, the vindication, the demonstration, the undeniable confirmation, it happened, right in front of everyone. That was the win. That was the moment. And the very next day, Elijah was sitting alone in the wilderness, hiding under a tree, asking to die. Take a moment with that, because that is a jarring transition. By any external measurement, Elijah should have been at the height of everything. He had just experienced what every person who carries a calling hopes to experience at some point: an unmistakable, undeniable, publicly witnessed confirmation that what they had been standing for was real and true and worth the cost. And he was under a tree, alone, done. "It is enough," he said. "I have had enough of this. Let it be over." Now, if you heard that story and your first reaction was some version of judgment, some thought about weak faith or spiritual failure or losing perspective, I want you to gently set that aside, because that reaction misses the entire point. Elijah was not spiritually weak. Elijah was depleted, and depletion and weakness are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. Depletion is what happens when a container has been used at full capacity for a very long time. When a vessel has been pouring out continuously at the highest level it is capable of, without being filled back up in equal measure, it is not a malfunction. It is not a character failure. It is what happens to any system, human or otherwise, that has been running at maximum without adequate restoration. Elijah poured out at Carmel more than most people are ever asked to pour out in a lifetime. He operated at the highest possible level of his calling, in a publicly high-stakes environment, carrying the full weight of what was at stake, and he did it alone. And then the adrenaline of the victory faded, and the crowd went home. And the confirmation that he had received, as real and as undeniable as it was, did not fill back up what the battle had cost him. And in that quiet, alone, with no more crowd and no more fire and no more clear direction, the gap between what he had given and what remained became impossible to ignore. That gap, that is what depletion feels like. And here is the part of the story that I need you to hold on to most carefully, because this is the part that changes how you understand this season you are in. The response from the source was not a rebuke, it was not a correction, it was not a motivational speech. It was not even a gentle challenge to keep going. It was not spiritual coaching. The response was food and rest. An angel showed up, quietly, without announcement, without drama, and touched Elijah and said, "Get up and eat. The journey is too great for you." And Elijah ate, and then lay down again. And the angel came back a second time. "Get up and eat again. The journey is too great for you." Twice, rest and eat, rest and eat, before any new assignment, before any redirection, before any conversation about what comes next or what the next chapter requires. The first response of the divine to the depletion of the warrior was not forward movement, it was rest and nourishment. That did not happen by accident. That pattern is in the story because it is meant to be seen. It is meant to be received by you, specifically, in this moment, in this season. The source does not expect you to move from the battle directly into the next chapter without recovery. That is not the design. And every time you have pushed yourself to do that, every time you have tried to manufacture energy you did not have, to generate forward motion from a depleted tank, you have been working against the design. The design is rest first, restoration first, receiving nourishment, receiving goodness, receiving what your depleted system actually needs first. And then the next assignment, and then the new direction. Not simultaneously, not in the gaps between doing everything else. First. I cannot tell you exactly how long that rest is supposed to last for you. I genuinely do not know. What I know is that the source who allowed your battle was also the source who showed up with food and rest for the one who collapsed after his. And I know that needing rest right now, genuinely needing it, is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of how much you gave. So here is the first thing I want you to receive from this message. And I want you to receive it slowly, because it is easy to hear and harder to let fully in. You are not still fighting. You are still recovering from the fight, and those are completely different things. Fighting asks you to press forward. Fighting asks you to push through. Fighting asks you to generate something, produce something, hold something in place through sheer effort and will and endurance. Recovery asks you to stop, not to collapse, not to disengage from your life or your calling or the people who need you, but to stop the bracing, stop the scanning, stop the forward press for its own sake. Stop calculating the next move before the current season has had the time to do what it is actually trying to do in you. Recovery asks you to let yourself be helped, to let nourishment arrive and actually receive it, to allow the good things that are beginning to appear in your life to land somewhere real, rather than being deflected by a nervous system that still thinks every quiet moment is a trap. That is not easy for someone who survived by fighting. I know that. Stopping feels wrong when your whole body is calibrated for motion. Receiving feels vulnerable when you have kept yourself safe by being self-sufficient. And genuine rest, the kind that actually restores something rather than just pausing before the next round, feels almost indulgent to someone who has lived in warrior mode for this long. But that is the assignment right now. And I am going to walk you through exactly what it looks like, because it is more specific and more sacred than just take a break. And if that were all this message gave you, if it only said, you are not still fighting, you are recovering, and the divine design for this season is rest before the next thing, that alone would already be worth everything you have invested in being here today. But there is something deeper, something I have not told you yet, something that goes beyond the spiritual picture of Elijah under the tree, beyond the concept of the lag, beyond the encouragement to rest. Something that is going to land in an entirely different part of you when you hear it. Because here is what the battle actually did to your brain. Not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual concept. At the level of the actual electrical activity happening inside your mind right now. And when you understand it, you are not just going to have peace about this season. You are going to understand yourself and the specific difficulty of finding peace in this season in a way that nothing has been able to explain before. That is what the next section of this message is about. And before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you have ever been in the middle of doing everything you know to do, praying everything you know to pray, believing as hard and as consistently as you have ever believed in your life, and still felt like there was a ceiling, like the peace you were reaching for was just slightly out of reach, like something you knew was real was somehow not fully accessible to you. If you have felt that, and I believe most people who have been in the kind of season you have been in have felt exactly that, what I am about to share with you is the reason why, and it is not what you think. Remember the very first thing I asked you to notice at the beginning of this message, the bracing in your shoulders, the tension across your chest, the low hum of readiness that has been living in your body. I told you it was real. I told you it was not weakness. I meant both of those things. Now, I want to show you what that bracing is doing, at a level that goes deeper than you might expect, and what it has to do with the specific frequency that your God-given brain was designed to run on, and what happens when a long battle pushes that frequency down. Stay with me. Your brain has been running a frequency that was never designed to be permanent. I want to start there, because everything I am about to share with you builds on that one sentence. And by the time I finish walking you through it, the specific difficulty you have had, finding peace, feeling the victory, quieting the part of you that will not stop scanning, is going to make complete sense in a new way. Not just spiritually, at the level of what is actually happening inside your mind. I want you to stay open to what I am about to say, because it is going to move through a space where science and the sacred meet. And I believe they are pointing at the same truth in two different languages. When you hear them together, something tends to shift in a way that neither language can produce on its own. Here is where I want to begin. Your brain communicates through electrical patterns. Scientists call them brain waves. And these patterns change depending on what you are doing, what you are feeling, what your life is asking of you in any given season. They are not fixed. They are not permanent. They are responsive. They shift based on what the brain is being called to manage. When you are deeply absorbed in creative work, when insight arrives suddenly and clearly, and you understand something you had not understood a moment before, when you have those rare experiences of everything clicking into place and time seems to dissolve, and what you are doing just flows, the brain is running in a specific frequency in those moments. Researchers have spent decades studying it, and what they have found is remarkable enough that I want to describe it to you carefully. This frequency is called the gamma wave. It is the highest of all the brainwave states, and what makes it remarkable is what happens when it is active: heightened perception, rapid and effortless learning, strong intuition, an unusual ability to notice connections and patterns that would not be visible in any other state, a sense of clarity about what matters and what does not, creativity that does not feel forced, and something that scientists, who are usually very careful about their language, have described as a feeling of profound calm alongside unusually sharp awareness. That combination, calm and sharp at the same time, is not something most adults experience regularly, but every one of us experienced it in abundance when we were children. Think back to the version of you that existed before life got complicated, before the weight of responsibility and disappointment and sustained pressure settled into your days. There was a version of you that absorbed everything with an appetite that seemed almost effortless, that made connections quickly and naturally, that perceived the world with a kind of openness and wonder that felt completely normal at the time, that had strong instincts and followed them without overthinking, that learned by playing and found the world genuinely, inexhaustibly interesting. That was gamma. That was your brain in its God-given state, operating at the frequency it was designed to inhabit, and it was not an accident that children live there so naturally. That frequency is the baseline the human brain is supposed to return to when the conditions of life allow it. But here is what happens over time, and I want to describe this carefully because it is important. There is a process that researchers have observed across studies from some of the most well-known institutions in the world. And what they have documented is this: as human beings move through sustained periods of stress, sustained periods of vigilance, sustained seasons of having to stay alert and ready and responsive to what is coming at them from the outside, the brain gradually shifts its dominant frequency. It shifts away from gamma, and it moves toward a frequency called beta. Beta is not a bad frequency. I want to be clear about that before I go further. Beta is the frequency of problem solving, of vigilance, of scanning the environment for what needs your attention, of staying alert, responsive, and ready. Beta is the warrior frequency, and in the seasons of your life that required warfare, Beta was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It kept you functional. It kept you protective of what mattered. It helped you stay alert to what was coming against you and respond appropriately. It held you in a posture of readiness that the season required. In the battle, Beta was not the enemy. Beta was the tool. The difficulty is what beta does to the experience of everything else. When the brain is running in sustained beta dominance, the access to gamma becomes restricted. The pathway back to the state of effortless clarity, strong intuition, creative flow, and deep settled calm gets narrowed, not closed permanently, but narrowed in a way that makes it genuinely difficult to reach, like trying to hear a quiet voice in a room where something loud has been running for a very long time. And this is why. This is why the peace that you know exists, that you believe is available, that you have experienced in fragments and touches throughout your life, feels like it is just slightly out of reach in this season. Not because it is not there, but because the frequency your brain has been running on actively suppresses the pathway to it. This is why prayer can feel like it is hitting a ceiling, not because prayer is not working, but because the gamma state, the state in which spiritual perception is most naturally available, most open, most receptive, has been pushed down by the sustained beta of the battle. And trying to reach the gamma frequency from a deeply beta state is like trying to tune in a signal that the dial you are holding is not calibrated to receive. And I have to stop and ask you something directly right now. Have you ever wondered why genuine peace feels harder to hold on to than the difficulty does? Why you can read something true and feel it land and then lose it again within a few hours? Why stillness, when it finally arrives, sometimes has an almost uncomfortable quality to it, like something you cannot quite settle into, even though every part of you wants to. That is not a failure of your faith. That is your brain in beta, touching the edge of gamma, and then being pulled back by a system that is still running the frequency of the battle. And here is the thing about the gamma state that I need you to understand in the context of this particular season. The ancient teachers described something. In different traditions, in different languages, across centuries and continents, they pointed at the same experience and tried to name it the best way their context allowed them to. Some called it the peace that surpasses understanding. Some called it divine union. Some described it as the state in which true guidance could be received, in which the voice of the source became audible and clear and unmistakable. Some called it the grace of being fully present, not to the noise of the mind, but to the deeper signal that runs underneath it. What they were describing in the language of their time is what the scientists are now mapping in the language of ours. They were describing gamma. That is not a reductive statement. I am not saying that gamma is all there is to spiritual experience. I am saying that the frequency at which the brain is most naturally open to receiving, most perceptive, most attuned, most able to hold both calm and clarity at the same time. That frequency is the God-given frequency, the one you were born running on, the one the battle pushed down. And recovery, genuine recovery from what you have been through, is not only spiritual or emotional, it is neurological. It is the return of gamma. The brain finding its way back to the frequency it was designed to inhabit. And this return does not happen through more effort. It does not happen through trying harder. It happens through conditions that the battle made nearly impossible to sustain, and that this new season is now, finally, beginning to allow now. There is something I want to share with you at this point in the message, and I share it not as an advertisement, not as an obligation, but because it is directly connected to what I just described, and because I believe it found its way to me for a reason, and that reason may include you. There is a neuroscientist named Dr. Robert Lake. He has spent 34 years studying the brain, and over the last decade, he has been working on a specific question, one that connects directly to everything I have just been telling you. The question is this: what helps the brain return to gamma after a sustained period of beta dominance? After a long season of vigilance and pressure, and the kind of warfare that pushes the gamma frequency down, what actually creates the conditions for that return? He did not approach that question casually. He studied research from institutions including MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Berkeley, Columbia University, and the Einstein Center in Berlin. He spent years looking at what the most rigorous science available could tell him about the conditions under which the brain's natural, God-given frequency comes back online. And what he developed from that research is something I genuinely want to tell you about. He compressed the technology, the specific sound frequencies that guide the brain back toward its gamma state, into a 7-minute audio track. You listen through headphones, eyes closed. That is it. There is no meditation technique to learn, no posture to hold, no practice that takes months before you feel anything, no waking up at 4 in the morning, no $7,000 piece of equipment. 7 minutes, through headphones, eyes closed, and the technology does the work. It is called the Genius Song. And the reason it is called that is not because it will make you a different kind of person. It is because it is designed to help you return to the frequency of the person you already are, the one you were before the battle, before the beta dominance, before the decline of the state you were born running on. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. To activate gamma through traditional methods, things like professional biofeedback therapy, you are looking at roughly $300 per session. For home equipment that produces similar results, the investment is often around $7,000. Even consistent meditation practice, which genuinely works over time, requires months of building the habit before most people experience significant neurological shift. And most people, especially people who have been in the kind of season you have been in, do not have that kind of time or resources or bandwidth. Dr. Lake's work compressed that technology into a format that a real person living a real life in a real season of recovery can actually access. The standard price for the audio track is $49. But for people who find this message, the price he has made available is $39. Not on Amazon, not on Spotify, not anywhere you can search for it. Exclusively through the link I have placed in the description and the pinned comment of this video. And for $39, this is what you receive. The main 7-minute track itself, a second track called Genius Child, designed for the brains of children who are still in the years when gamma comes most naturally to help protect and strengthen what they already carry. A book, the original book that the film called The Secret was actually drawn from, the version with more substance and more honesty than what most people have encountered, normally sold for $20, included at no additional cost. A guided visualization that walks you through 4 areas of your life: finances, love, health, and personal well-being, in a way that is designed to work in the gamma state rather than the beta state. And an infographic, a 1-page summary of the 5 most important habits for creating a life you actually want to inhabit, something you can return to without needing to reread anything. All of that delivered immediately to your email. No shipping, no waiting. And if you listen to it and feel nothing, receive nothing, experience no shift whatsoever, you get your money back, 100%. With no questions asked, no explanation required, and no limit on how many times you can listen before requesting the refund, you have nothing to lose. And that is an honest statement, not a sales pitch. Now, before I tell you how to find it, there is something important I need to say, because there are other audio files circulating under similar names that have nothing to do with this work. They carry names that sound like what I am describing, but what they contain is ordinary music or ambient sound with no brain entrainment technology embedded in it at all. No gamma activation. Just audio that sounds similar on the surface, and people who find those files thinking they found the same thing receive none of the actual benefit that Dr. Lake's work produces. The only way to receive the genuine product with the actual brain entrainment technology, the full set of bonuses, and the money-back guarantee is through the link I have placed in the description and in the pinned comment of this video. Not on any search engine, not on any streaming platform, not anywhere else. That link is the only safe path to the original. If something in you felt recognition when I described the gamma frequency, when I described the God-given brain state that the battle has been suppressing, when I described what it would mean to have a simple, science-based way to begin supporting the return of that state, then that link is there for you. When you are ready, no urgency, no deadline, just an open door. But what I was saying, and what I want to come back to now, is that recovery is neurological. It is real, it is documented, and it does not happen through more striving. It happens through conditions that create the space for Gamma to return. And understanding that changes how you treat yourself in this season fundamentally. Because the default response of a chosen one who does not know this is to try harder, to push through. To assume that the fact that peace is not fully accessible yet means they need to do more, pray more, believe more intensely, generate more willpower. And every one of those responses, as genuine and as motivated by real faith as they are, keeps the brain in the exact same beta dominance that is making the peace difficult to access in the first place. The harder you try to force your way into Gamma, the longer beta stays dominant. And this is the second revelation I want you to receive from this message. Listen to it carefully. The reason you cannot fully feel the victory is not a spiritual problem. It is a frequency problem. And a frequency problem has a frequency solution, which means that recovery, real recovery, the kind that actually restores what the battle cost, is not about managing your emotions or maintaining a certain level of spiritual performance. It is about creating the conditions that allow your brain to return to what it was always designed to be. That means rest, not laziness, not spiritual withdrawal, not the absence of purpose, but genuine, intentional, unapologetic conditions for restoration, the same conditions that the source provided for Elijah. Food, rest, more rest. Not because Elijah had failed, because the journey was too great, and the container needed to be refilled before the next chapter could begin. Your journey has been too great too, and your container needs to be refilled. Now here is what I most need you to understand before we move forward. And this is the part that I believe is going to catch some of you by surprise. Most people, when they hear the word recovery, hear it as the absence of something, the absence of striving, the absence of effort, and so they assume that a season of recovery is a season of passivity, a season of doing less, a season where nothing is happening and nothing is being built, and the calling is simply on hold while they wait to feel better. That is not what recovery is for a chosen one. Recovery for the chosen one is one of the most demanding things a soul can be asked to do, not because it requires physical exertion or external output, because it requires something that someone who has survived through vigilance and self-sufficiency and the constant output of a warrior finds enormously, genuinely difficult. It requires allowing, and there are 3 specific assignments in this season of allowing. 3 forms of sacred work that look like stillness from the outside, but require everything from the inside. And understanding them, naming them, seeing them clearly for what they are, is going to change how you move through the rest of this season. But before I give you those 3 assignments, I need to first show you what recovery is not. Because the misunderstanding of what this season is asking may be the single most costly mistake a chosen one can make on the threshold of everything they fought for. What recovery is not, and what it actually is. And the first of the 3 sacred assignments. That is what comes next. Stay with me. Recovery is not a spiritual vacation. I want to say that clearly and directly before I go any further, because if you are the kind of person I believe is listening to this message right now, then the word recovery may have already triggered a small internal resistance, a quiet voice that says something like, "I cannot afford to slow down," or "resting feels like falling behind," or "this sounds like permission to stop trying, and stopping feels dangerous." That resistance is not weakness. That resistance is the warrior speaking. And the warrior has been in charge for a very long time, for good and necessary reasons. So I want to honor what that resistance is actually saying before I challenge where it has it wrong. What it is saying is this: the mission matters. the calling is real. There are things that have been waiting for a long time. There are people who need what I carry. And anything that looks like withdrawal feels like betrayal of everything I fought so hard to stay faithful to. I hear that. And I want to say clearly, you are not wrong that the mission matters. You are not wrong that the calling is real. You are not wrong that what you carry is needed. What is wrong is the assumption that moving forward from depletion produces the same results as moving forward from restoration. It does not. Think of it this way. When a tree has been through a hard winter, one of those long, punishing winters that strips everything and leaves the branches bare and the roots in frozen ground for months, the arrival of spring does not mean the tree should immediately produce its maximum fruit. The right response to the thaw is not to begin performing at capacity. The right response is to receive the new conditions, to draw up what the roots have been unable to access, to slowly, steadily rebuild what the long cold took. And out of that rebuilding, over the right amount of time, comes not just fruit, but fruit in greater abundance than what the tree was producing before the winter came. The winter was not the end of the story. The winter was the formation of the story, and the spring is not the moment to push the tree. The spring is the moment to feed the roots. You are the tree, and you are standing in early spring right now. Recovery is not the absence of purpose. Recovery is what makes the next level of purpose possible. Recovery is not spiritual laziness. Recovery is the most sophisticated form of preparation available to someone in this season. Recovery is not falling behind. Recovery is refusing to carry the wounds of the last battle into a season that was designed to heal them. That is the frame. And it matters, because how you understand this season will determine how you move through it. And how you move through it will determine who you are on the other side of it. So, let me show you what recovery actually is, because it is more specific than most people realize, and more demanding. There are 3 assignments in this season, 3 specific forms of sacred work, 3 postures that look like stillness from the outside, but require something from the inside that is, in many ways, harder than anything the battle asked of you. I am going to give you all 3. I am going to walk through the first one fully in this section, and the second and third in the section that follows. But I want to name all 3 now, so you can hold the whole shape of it as we go. The first assignment is grief, the second is receiving, and the third is rebuilding identity from a completely different foundation than the one the battle was built on. Each one of those is going to require more of you than it sounds like it should. Each one is going to ask something that a person who survived by being self-reliant and vigilant and output-driven finds genuinely uncomfortable. And each one is absolutely essential to the season you are entering. Let me start with the first one. Before you can fully step into what is coming, something needs to happen that most people in your position try to skip, not because they are avoiding it consciously, but because the culture you live in, the spiritual culture and the broader culture, has very little space or language for what I am about to describe. You need to grieve the battle. I do not mean grieve in the sense of falling apart. I do not mean that you need to return to the hardest moments and re-experience them. I mean something more specific and more dignified than that. There are things that were lost in the season you just walked through, things that left quietly, without announcement, because the battle required all of your attention, and there was simply no room to stop and acknowledge what was going quietly missing while you were focused on holding the line. And those things deserve to be named, not to hold on to them, but to honor them, because your soul cannot fully receive what is coming as long as it is still silently carrying the grief of what the last season cost. So, let me name some of what I believe may be in that grief. And as I do, I want you to simply notice which ones land somewhere true in you. You do not have to do anything with them right now. Just notice. There is the grief of who you were before the battle began. The simpler version. The one who had not yet developed this particular layer of guardedness. The one who could trust more easily, hope more freely, receive a good thing without immediately bracing for what might take it away. That version of yourself was reshaped by the experience. And while the reshaping built something in you that is extraordinary, there is still something worth grieving about the simplicity that the battle cost. You are allowed to miss who you were before it got this hard. There is the grief of time, of seasons that stretched far longer than they were supposed to stretch, of years that were heavy in ways that other people's years were not, of chapters that should have been brief but became long. You cannot get that time back. And when you are honest about that, really honest, without the spiritual framing that sometimes turns grief into a praise report before the grief has had time to actually move through, there is something genuinely painful there. You are allowed to acknowledge what those years cost. There is the grief of relationships. People who were in your life at the beginning of the battle, who are not in your life at the end of it. Not all of them left badly. Some simply could not go where the season required you to go. Some faded naturally. Some ended in ways that still do not fully make sense. Whatever the reason, there are gaps in your relational landscape now that were not there before. And those gaps are real. You are allowed to acknowledge who is missing. There is the grief of the plans. The specific things you believed were coming that looked very different by the time the season shifted. Not that the outcome was worse necessarily, just different. And the version of the future you had been carrying in your imagination, the one that felt real and close and possible, had to be released somewhere in the middle of the waiting. And releasing it was an act of genuine sacrifice, even if no one witnessed it, even if there was no ceremony for it, even if you did it quietly in a moment that no one else would ever know happened. You are allowed to grieve the version of the future you let go of so you could hold on. And there is the grief of a certain kind of innocence. This one is the hardest to name. The innocence of someone who had not yet learned what this kind of season can do to a person. The state of not yet knowing, from the inside, what it feels like when something you deeply believed in takes longer than seems fair. When someone you trusted does not come through. When the gap between what you were promised and what your life looks like becomes wide enough to live inside for months or years, that innocence does not come back, and that is a real loss. And pretending it is not, in order to seem more spiritually advanced or more grateful or more certain than you actually feel, does not make the loss smaller. It just makes it unacknowledged. And unacknowledged grief does not disappear. It just goes underground. And underground grief shows up later, in places you did not expect, in ways that do not make sense, until you trace them back to the thing that was never allowed to be named. I want to give you a framework for understanding why this matters so much, and I am going to draw it from one of the most quietly profound moments in any of the sacred stories. There is the story of the son who left, took his inheritance early, went as far from home as he could go, spent everything, found himself at the lowest point of his life, genuinely destitute and genuinely alone, having spent everything he had and lost everything he thought he was going to build. And then he came to himself. That phrase is worth sitting with for a moment. He came to himself. Not to a prayer, not to a program, not to a strategy for how to get back on his feet. He came to himself first. He became present to his own reality, the full weight of it, without softening it or rationalizing it or rushing past it toward the solution. He sat with what was actually true about where he was and what it had cost him. He named it, in his own mind, in his own words, in the quiet of his own reckoning. And then he got up, and then he moved toward home, and then the father who had been watching the horizon ran toward him. The order matters. Recovery begins not with the return, but with the coming to yourself, with the honest, unsoftened acknowledgement of what the season actually was, what it actually cost, and who you actually are, standing inside of the aftermath of it. That acknowledgement is not defeat. That acknowledgement is the beginning of the most genuine kind of forward movement available to you. And I want to give you something to do with that right now. Not a complicated practice, something simple. Something you can do right here, right where you are, without moving anywhere or doing anything external. In the quiet of your own mind, I want you to name one thing that the battle cost you. Not a speech, not a full inventory, just one thing, the one that comes forward most naturally when you give it space to. One loss, one grief. One thing that was quietly set down somewhere in the middle of the season that has not yet been properly acknowledged. Let it surface. And when it does, I want you to say, internally, one sentence to it, not to fix it, not to resolve it, just to see it. Something like, this was real, or I acknowledge what this cost, or simply, I see you. That is the beginning of grief done well, not the collapsing into it, the honest, dignified, private acknowledgement of what was real. And something in your nervous system will recognize the difference between that and the suppression it has been doing. Something in your body knows when something that has been underground is finally being allowed to surface with dignity. Now let me move to something that lives alongside the grief. Something that is happening at the same time and is just as important to name. As you have been in this battle season, you have been wearing an identity that was necessary, right, and appropriate for the time. And now, as the season shifts, that identity is being asked to soften. And softening is one of the hardest things a person can do after a long season of needing to be hard. The warrior identity was given to you for a reason. I want to say that clearly because what I am about to say is not a critique of it. The vigilance, the endurance, the capacity to keep going past the point where most people would stop, the ability to function under pressure, to hold a line, to protect what mattered even at significant personal cost. These are not small things, these are gifts. And in the season that just passed, they were the exact gifts the season required. But an identity that served you in one season, held too tightly into the next season, becomes something else. It becomes a limitation. And the very strengths that kept you alive in the battle, the hypervigilance, the self-sufficiency, the constant output, the reluctance to need anything or anyone, can become the exact barriers that prevent you from entering the fullness of what this new season is offering. There is a specific pattern for this in the stories, and it is one of the most honest and least sentimentalized moments in any of the sacred narratives. There was a man named David, and David was, from a very young age, someone with a significant calling on his life. A calling so significant that it required an extraordinary amount of preparation, testing, and formation before it could be fully inhabited. He was anointed for something extraordinary when he was still very young. And then he spent years, many years, not in the palace for which he had been anointed, but in the wilderness, in the waiting, in the caves, and in the battle. By the time David had secured his position, and the nation was at peace, and the time came to build something of lasting significance, he wanted to build a temple. A permanent house for the presence he had been carrying all those years in the wilderness and the battle. And it was a genuine desire. not self-promotion, not ego. A real impulse toward something meaningful and lasting and worthy. And the response he received was not what he expected. He was told, "You will not build it." Not because he had failed, not because something was wrong with him, because of who he was and what he had been formed by. "You are a man of war," the message said. "You have shed much blood. The building was for someone else, for the one who would come after him, for the one formed in a different season by different conditions, who would carry the specific gift that the building required." David's job was not to build. David's job was to hand the plans and the resources and the vision to the one who would build, to steward the transition, to receive the rest that the warrior had not allowed himself for a very long time, and to trust that the contribution he had made in the battle season was its own complete and necessary thing, even if the next chapter belonged to someone else's hands. That is a particular kind of surrender, and it is the kind that only someone with a genuinely significant calling ever has to face, because it asks you to release not just a project, but a piece of your identity. The piece that says, "My worth is in what I build, in what I produce, in what I can show for all of these years." What if the years of battle were their own complete contribution? What if what you held on to, what you protected, what you kept alive in the dark, was its own form of building? What if the work of the warrior season was not a prelude to the real contribution, but was, in itself, essential to the entire story in ways you may not fully see yet? Because the warrior who cannot soften, who cannot hand the next chapter to the next version of themselves, who cannot step back from the battle posture even when the battle has ended, will carry the wounds of the warrior into a season that was designed to heal them. And those wounds will show up in the building, in the relationships, in the very things the next season is supposed to produce. The softening of the warrior is not the loss of the warrior. It is the integration of the warrior, the placing of that strength in its right proportion within a larger, fuller identity. One that still has access to the endurance and the discipline and the capacity for sustained effort, but also has access to what the warrior was protecting all along: the tenderness, the creativity, the genuine joy, the ability to receive without immediately looking for the catch. That fuller identity is who you are becoming in this season. And I want you to sit with that for just a moment before we go further. If the idea of softening feels like loss, if resting feels wrong, if receiving feels somehow less noble than striving, if letting the warrior be one part of you rather than the whole of you feels frightening rather than freeing, I want you to hear this. That discomfort is not evidence that softening is wrong for you. That discomfort is evidence of how long and how faithfully the warrior has served. And the warrior has earned a rest. There is more to say. The second and third sacred assignments of this season are where this message becomes the most demanding. Because the second assignment is going to ask something of you that is, in my experience, the hardest thing for a high-capacity, self-sufficient, faith-driven, chosen one to genuinely do. It is going to ask you to receive, not to earn, not to manage, not to stay just slightly in control of how much goodness is allowed to arrive, but to genuinely, fully, vulnerably receive. And the third assignment is going to ask you to discover who you are when you are not defined by what you can do, when the armor is off, when there is nothing to prove and no battle to fight and no one to show up for in that particular sustained way. These two assignments together are going to ask more of your soul than any battle I have seen a chosen one face. But before I get there, I want to tell you something. In the final section of this message, I made you a promise earlier. I said I was going to speak something over your life. something specific. Something I believe was part of why this message found you today. That closing is still coming, and it is built from everything we have walked through together, everything we have named, every revelation, every assignment. It all leads there. Stay with me all the way to the end, because what I am about to share in the next section of this message, about receiving and about rebuilding identity from a completely different foundation, is the section where the most significant shift tends to happen. And underneath those two assignments, there is one truth, the deepest truth I am going to share in this entire message, that I have been building toward from the first sentence. I have not said it yet, but it is coming. The second assignment is going to ask something specific of you, and before I name it, I want to tell you why it is the hardest one. Not because it is complicated, not because it requires a particular kind of discipline or a particular level of spiritual maturity. It is the hardest one because it runs directly against the grain of everything you learned to do in order to survive. Here is what I mean by that. When you are in a long battle, you learn, out of necessity, to be self-contained, to need as little as possible from outside yourself. Because needing things from outside yourself, counting on things to arrive, opening yourself to receive what you were hoping for, and then not receiving it, that became costly. And the cost was high enough, often enough, that the intelligent response was to tighten the radius of your dependence, to rely on yourself, to give more than you received, to be the one who provides rather than the one who requires provision, to function without, and you became very good at it. That capacity, the ability to function from your own reserves when nothing is arriving from the outside, is one of the most extraordinary things about you. It is part of what makes you someone whose calling is significant. Most people, under the conditions you have been under, would have reduced their expectations until the expectations matched the circumstances. You kept the expectations alive even when the circumstances argued against them. That is remarkable. And it cost you something specific. It cost you the ability to receive easily. Because here is what happens when a person is in sustained giving mode, sustained output mode, sustained self-sufficient mode for a long time. The mechanism for receiving, the part of the soul that knows how to open, how to allow goodness to arrive and actually land, how to be held rather than to hold, how to be given to rather than to give, that mechanism gets stiff, underused. And like any part of something that goes underused for a long time, it does not simply spring back into full function the moment you decide you are ready for it. Receiving is a skill. And for many chosen ones in this season, it is the most underdeveloped skill they have. Let me be very direct about what this looks like in practice, because I think many of you will recognize it. Someone does something genuinely kind for you. Not performative kindness, not kindness that wants something in return. Just a real, free, unattached act of care directed at you, and instead of simply receiving it, something inside you immediately begins to calculate. How do I reciprocate? What do I owe? How do I make sure I am not a burden? How do I stay even, stay balanced, stay in a position where I am not beholden? Or something good arrives in your life, something you have been waiting on for a long time, and instead of allowing yourself to fully inhabit the goodness of it, some quiet part of you immediately begins to brace, begins to wonder how long it will last, begins to look for what might be wrong with it, begins to hold it at a slight arm's length, just in case, just so that if it is taken away, the distance will make the loss more manageable. Or someone tells you something true and genuinely positive about who you are and what you carry, and rather than letting it land somewhere real, you deflect it. Change the subject, minimize it, turn it back outward. Not because you are humble, but because being truly seen, being genuinely held in someone else's full positive regard, is one of the most uncomfortable things a self-sufficient warrior can experience. I want to stop and ask you something right now. When was the last time you received something fully? A kindness, a blessing, a moment of genuine goodness, without immediately doing something to manage it, reciprocate it, minimize it, or brace against the possibility of losing it. I ask that not to produce guilt. I ask it because the answer is diagnostic. The degree to which receiving feels uncomfortable or even slightly dangerous is the degree to which the warrior posture has become the dominant way of relating to life. And in this new season, that posture, as valuable as it was, is the exact thing that will prevent you from entering the fullness of what has been fought for. Because what this season is holding for you cannot be earned. It cannot be strategized. It cannot be generated from within yourself by effort or willpower or endurance. It can only be received, and receiving begins with one thing. One specific interior shift that does not require you to do anything external. One posture of the soul that changes everything. It begins with allowing yourself to be okay. Not when you have processed everything, not when the circumstances have clarified, not when you have figured out the next step or earned the right to feel good about where you are, right now, as you are. In the uncertainty, in the not yet, in the strange in-between of this threshold, allowing yourself to be okay is not denial. It is not bypassing what is real or pretending the remaining questions have been answered. It is the specific act of choosing not to brace against the present moment, of allowing this moment, this one, to be acceptable as it is, of releasing the tension that says, I cannot fully land here until things are more resolved. That releasing, that small internal allowing, is the beginning of receiving, and it sounds simpler than it is. Because the warrior in you has been trained, through long experience, that landing fully in the present moment is how you get caught off guard. That relaxing the vigilance is how you miss what is coming. That allowing yourself to feel genuinely okay is the thing you can only do once everything is secure. But here is what I want you to hear. That training was right for the season it came from. And it is costing you something real in the season you are entering. There is a figure in the sacred stories who has always moved me deeply when I think about this specific quality of receiving. Her name was Mary. And what she was asked to receive was not a small thing. She was young. She had no reason to believe that what was being described to her was possible by any law of the world she inhabited. She had every reason to question it, to push back, to ask for guarantees, to say, I will consider this when I have more information, more security, more certainty about what this will cost me and what will be required and how it will all resolve. And what she said instead was this: let it be to me according to your word. Not, I will try to accept this. Not, I will work toward this. Not, I am in the process of evaluating whether this is real. Let it be. Let it arrive. I open to it. I allow it. I receive what is being given rather than standing at the edge of it, managing the approach. That is, the posture of the receiver. And it is not passive. It is the most active interior movement available to a human being. It is the choosing in real time, with real uncertainty still present, to open rather than guard, to allow rather than manage, to receive rather than earn. This is your second assignment in this season, and it is going to require you to practice it repeatedly, not once and done, repeatedly. Because every time the old habit reasserts, every time the warrior in you reaches for control or calculation, or the slight pulling back from what is arriving, the practice is to notice and choose again. Let it be, let it arrive, let it land. You do not have to do it perfectly, you only have to do it honestly. And now I want to give you the third assignment. This one has the longest timeline of the three, and the most profound impact on who you carry yourself into the next season. As when a person rebuilds after a hard season, the default impulse is to rebuild from output, from what they can do, from what they can produce and prove and demonstrate, from the reassertion of capacity, the showing that they are still functional, still contributing, still someone whose presence makes a tangible difference. And this impulse is completely understandable. For a high-capacity person, the self is often so connected to what the self can do that the restoration of doing feels like the restoration of self. But that is not the rebuild this season is asking for. The rebuild this season is asking for is far more fundamental and far more difficult, because it is the rebuild of identity from rest, from being, from discovering who you are when you are not performing, not surviving, not holding the line, not proving anything to anyone, including yourself. This sounds straightforward. It is not. When a person has been defined, even partially, by their endurance and their output and their ability to show up and function under pressure, the question, who am I when I am not doing anything, can feel genuinely destabilizing, because the answer is not immediately obvious, and the not knowing can feel dangerously close to not mattering, as if identity only exists in proportion to output, as if the person underneath the doing might turn out to be less than the person on top of it. That fear is not the truth, but it is a real fear, and it deserves to be named before I tell you what is on the other side of it. There was a man who spent years in circumstances he did not choose, that did not make logical sense, that from the outside looked like a story moving steadily in the wrong direction. His name was Joseph, and if you know his name, I want you to set aside what you think you know about the end of his story for a moment, because I want you to sit with the middle of it, with the part that almost no one stays in when they tell it. Joseph had a dream when he was young, a clear, vivid, unmistakable sense of what his life was moving toward, and then everything that happened next looked like the opposite of that dream becoming real. He was betrayed by the people closest to him. He was sold. He was taken to a foreign country where no one knew who he was or what he carried or what he had been promised. He worked faithfully for years in a house that was not his own, built trust and relationship and position, and then was accused of something he did not do and was put in prison. Years in prison. The text says it plainly. Years. And in those years, two things were happening simultaneously. Two things that were, on the surface, contradictory. Nothing about his circumstances was moving toward what he had seen in the dream. Nothing he was doing was producing the outcome he had been promised. There was no visible evidence that the formation was connected to any real future. And at the same time, everything was happening. The wisdom that would eventually allow him to govern was being built in him during those years. Not through formal education, not through a clear program with visible benchmarks. Through the slow, often invisible, always faithful work of formation in conditions he did not control. The patience that he would need for the kind of leadership that outlasts any single season that was built in prison. The capacity to hold a long view when the short view looked impossible, that was built in Potiphar's house. The genuine humility that prevents significant authority from becoming corruption, that was built in the years when he had no authority at all. He was not idle in those years, but he was not building anything visible. And he had no guarantee, no clear signal, no divine announcement that said, "Hold on, this is going somewhere." The next chapter arrives in a specific number of months. He just lived faithfully in the conditions he was in, and in the living, something was becoming. And when the moment came, when the door opened in a way he could not have engineered or anticipated or produced through his own effort, the person who walked through that door was someone the years of formation had made. Not the dreamer from the beginning, not the prisoner from the middle, someone new, someone larger, someone the difficult years had built in ways that the easy years never could have. And he said something later, standing in the fullness of what the whole story had produced, looking back at the brothers who had betrayed him, standing in a position no one would have predicted from any chapter of his story. He said, "You meant it for harm, but it was intended, the whole time, for good, not despite the difficulty. Through it, not around the years, inside of them." This is what the third assignment is for, the rebuilding of identity from the inside out, from the truest and most essential version of who you are, rather than from what you can produce. The discovering, in the conditions of this recovery season, of the person who was being formed in the battle, the qualities, the depths, the capacities that only years of sustained pressure and sustained faithfulness could have built. Here are 3 small invitations for this assignment, not prescriptions, not a program, just 3 gentle openings into who you are when the armor is off. The first is this: return to something you loved before the battle began, not something productive, not something that connects to your calling or your output or what you can show for your time, something you simply loved, something that brought genuine joy for no reason other than the joy itself, a creative thing, a playful thing, a quiet thing, something that existed in you before the season required all of your energy just to survive. It is still in there. And finding your way back to it is one of the most direct routes to the version of yourself that the battle season was protecting all along. The second is this: let your days have empty space in them, not planned empty, not organized margins. Genuinely unscheduled time that you do not fill. And when the warrior in you rises up and says, "This is irresponsible, this is wasted time, this is falling behind," I want you to say back to it, quietly and firmly, "This is the assignment. This space is sacred." The source put food before the next direction and rest before the new assignment, and so do I. The third is this: pay attention to what you notice when you are not managing anything. When the agenda falls away and the striving quiets, and you are simply present in a moment without a task, what do you notice? What draws your eye? What thought arrives unbidden? What question rises naturally when the noise of the doing settles? That noticing is not random. That is the voice of your truest self, the one that has been waiting patiently and persistently through the entire length of the battle for a season quiet enough to finally speak. And that voice has something to say about who you are, about what you carry, about what comes next. But it can only say it in the conditions of genuine stillness. And those conditions are what this season is offering you, if you can receive them. So, those are the 3 assignments. Grieve what the battle cost, receive what the season is offering. Rebuild identity from who you are rather than from what you do. And they do not move in a straight line. I want to be clear about that. They overlap, they circle back. You will be 3 weeks into receiving and find a pocket of grief you had not named yet. You will be rebuilding from rest, and the warrior will return, full force, insisting that you are wasting the season. You will grieve something you thought you had already released. That is not regression. That is the actual process. That is what it looks like when healing is happening rather than being performed. And through all of it, there is one thing that holds steady, one truth that is present underneath every assignment, underneath every uncomfortable moment, underneath every time the warrior reasserts and the receiving feels impossible and the rebuilding seems to be taking longer than it should. One truth that I have been building toward this entire message, and I have not said it yet. 3 assignments, and I believe that if this message gave you only those 3 things, named them clearly, walked through them honestly, it would already be among the most valuable conversations you have had in this entire season. It would already be worth every minute you have stayed with it. But underneath the assignments, there is something else, something that is not a strategy or a framework or a set of things to practice. Something that recontextualizes the entire story, the battle, the recovery, the assignments. Every season that came before this one, everything that happened that you are still trying to make sense of, it is a truth about who you have always been. And it is not what you think. I have been building toward it from the very first sentence of this message. Every revelation, every story, every acknowledgement of what the battle cost, every careful distinction between the warrior and the receiver, they have all been moving toward this one thing, this one truth that, when it lands, I believe will shift something in you at a level that nothing else in this conversation has been able to reach. That is what the next section of this message is entirely about, and it is the most important thing I am going to say. Stay with me. I thought you were a warrior who needed to learn how to rest. That is what I believed about you when I began this message. It was a reasonable belief. The title of this message said it. The battle is over. You won. Your new job is to rest and recover. And everything we have walked through together, the lag, the depletion, the grief, the assignments, all of it seemed to be in service of that idea. That you are a warrior. And that warriors, after long campaigns, need restoration before they can go back out. That is a true idea, and it has been worth every minute we have spent with it. But it is not the deepest truth. And the deepest truth is what I have been building toward. So I am going to say it now, slowly, because I want it to have enough space to do what it is meant to do. You were never a warrior. The warrior was the assignment. It was not the identity. Let me say that again, because I do not want it to slide past without landing. The warrior was what you had to become for a season. It was the role the journey required. It was the capacity the battle called forward. And you inhabited it faithfully at great personal cost for longer than most people could have sustained it. And the warrior was real. The endurance was real. The discipline was real. The vigilance was real. But the warrior was never who you actually are. It was what you had to wear to protect what you actually are. And the distinction between those two things, between the role and the identity, between what you had to become and who you have always been underneath it, that distinction is the most important thing I am going to say in this entire message. Because how you understand your own identity in this season will determine everything about how you move through it. So, let me show you what I mean. When someone has been in a prolonged, genuinely difficult season, and they have survived it by developing specific capacities, by becoming resilient and self-sufficient and vigilant and enduring, the natural conclusion is that those qualities are who they are. That the battle revealed their identity, that the warrior is the self, finally discovered. But I want to suggest something different, something that I believe is more true. The battle did not reveal your identity. The battle protected your identity. The warrior was built around something that needed protecting, and that something, the thing at the center of all the armor, the thing the whole long season was circling and defending and keeping alive, that thing is who you actually are. And that thing is not a fighter. That thing is a receiver, a carrier, a vessel, someone designed not primarily to take ground, but to hold something and transmit it and pour it into the lives of the people who will find you. Someone designed to be a container for something larger than themselves and to make it accessible to the people who need it in a form they can actually receive. You were always a receiver. And I want you to feel the weight of what that means. Not receiver in the passive sense. Not someone who simply waits and collects. A receiver in the deepest sense. Someone through whom something moves. Someone whose primary assignment is not to generate, but to be generated through. Someone whose greatest contribution is not what they produce from their own resources, but what passes through them from a source larger than themselves into a world that desperately needs it. That is who you are. That is who you have always been. And the battle was not evidence that you are primarily a warrior. The battle was evidence that what you carry as a receiver is worth fighting over. Think about that for a moment. The intensity of what came against you was not random. Resistance, sustained and significant resistance, does not target things that do not matter. A battle of the kind you have been in is not proportional to an ordinary life or an ordinary calling. It is proportional to what is at stake, proportional to what is being carried, proportional to the significance of what the carrier is designed to pour into the world. The harder the battle, the larger the thing being protected. And if your battle was as hard and as long and as costly as I believe it was, then what it was protecting inside of you is extraordinarily significant. Not because you are special in a way that sets you above anyone, but because what you carry, what you are designed to receive and transmit and pour out into the lives of the people who find you, that is genuinely needed. In a world that is running out of genuine hope, in spaces where people have stopped believing that something real is still possible, in relationships and communities and rooms where the light has gone quiet, there needs to be someone who kept a light alive in the dark long enough to carry it in and set it down in a way that other people can see by it. That is your assignment, not the fighting, the carrying, the receiving, the shining. Now I want to take you back through the figures we have walked through in this message, because when you see them through this lens, something in the whole story shifts. Elijah at Carmel. We said he was a warrior who had the greatest victory of his life, and then collapsed. But look at him again from the other angle. Elijah was not primarily a fighter. He was a prophet. He was a receiver and transmitter of something the nation desperately needed and had stopped believing was real. The battle on Carmel was not his core assignment. His core assignment was to carry and speak a truth that the culture around him had suppressed, and he could not do that from a depleted vessel. The collapse after Carmel was not a failure of the warrior. It was the depletion of the receiver, and the divine response, the food and the rest and the quietness, was not restorative care for a soldier. It was the refilling of a vessel so that the vessel could carry again. David in the wilderness. We said he was a warrior formed by years of battle before the palace, but look at him again. David's deepest contribution to history was not the battles he won, though the battles were real and necessary. His deepest contribution was the songs, the psalms, the language for what it feels like to be in the dark and still reach toward the light, the words that gave millions of people across thousands of years a vocabulary for experiences they could not otherwise name. And those songs were not written in triumph. They were written in the cave, in the running, in the hiding. In the seasons when no one could have looked at David's circumstances and said, "This is a person whose contribution will outlast everything that is currently pressing against him." David was not primarily a warrior. He was a voice, a receiver of language for the human experience of the divine. And everything the battle taught him, everything the caves and the wilderness and the long waiting wrote into him, went into the songs, and the songs went into the world, and the world received them. And Joseph. We said Joseph survived betrayal and prison and years of invisible formation. But look at him now, all the way through, from the beginning. The dream was not of a warrior conquering enemies. The dream was of a provider, of someone whose position would make it possible for the people he loved, and many he did not yet know, to receive what they needed to survive. The whole story was about a receiver, someone through whom resources and wisdom and provision would flow from a source larger than himself to a world in genuine crisis. And the pit was not where Joseph lost. The pit was the delivery system. Hear that carefully. The pit was the delivery system. The betrayal, the imprisonment, the years of invisible formation with no external validation and no visible progress toward the dream, those were not obstacles to the assignment. They were the mechanism by which the assignment was being built in him. Every season of difficulty was depositing something in the vessel, something that would only make sense from the other side, something he could not have received any other way, something the palace would require, and the pit was the only place it could be formed. And when he stood in front of his brothers, the brothers who had thrown him into that pit, and said, "You intended this for harm, but it was being used for good," the whole time he was not performing spiritual maturity. He was accurately describing the shape of the story he had lived. The harm was real. The cost was real. The years were real. And the good was also real, the whole time. Now I want to bring that same lens to your story, your specific story, the battle you have been in, the seasons that stretched longer than they should have, the years that cost more than they should have cost, the things that were lost and the things that almost broke, and the version of yourself that was shaped by going through something genuinely hard for a genuinely long time. Look at all of it again through this lens. The delay was not punishment. The delay was protection. Protection of something being built in you that was not yet complete. Something that, if it had been released too early, would not have had the depth it needed to carry what was going to be asked of it. The delay was the pit doing what pits do, adding layers, adding foundation, adding the weight of genuine experience that makes what you say about hope credible to someone who has given up on it. The isolation was not abandonment. The isolation was formation, the specific kind that only happens when the crowd goes away and the external validation disappears, and what remains is just you and the source and the question of whether you still believe when there is nothing social about it. That formation cannot happen in public. It cannot be observed or applauded into existence. It happens in the cave, in the prison, in the wilderness, in the long nights when it was just you. And what gets built in those conditions is the most durable thing a person can carry. The rejection was not a verdict on your value. The rejection was redirection by someone who could see what you could not yet see about where you were going and what that destination required you to leave behind. Every door that closed was not evidence that no door would ever open. It was evidence that the wrong door was being closed so that you would still be standing in the right place when the right door moved. The exhaustion was not weakness. The exhaustion was the cost of carrying something real in a world that was not yet ready to receive it. Carrying light in a dark room is tiring. Not because the light is the problem, but because the darkness requires more of the light than the light can easily sustain indefinitely. The exhaustion was proportional to what was being carried. And what was being carried was significant. None of it was wasted. I want to say that one more time, because I need you to hear it at the level at which it is true, not as comfort, not as a way of making the pain smaller, as a description of what I genuinely believe is accurate about the shape of your story. Not one day was wasted, not one night, not one prayer that seemed to go unanswered, not one moment of choosing to hold on when letting go would have been easier. Every single piece of it was being used, in a direction you could not see from inside it, for a purpose that the whole of the story, not just the chapter you were in, required, for the formation of the vessel that would eventually carry what you were always designed to carry. And now I want to tell you who you are becoming, not who you will become at some distant future point. Who you are becoming right now, in this season, in this recovery, in this strange and sacred in-between. You are becoming the wounded healer. The wounded healer is not someone who has healed completely and then helps others from a position of resolution. The wounded healer is someone who has been through something real enough and has been willing to stay with the healing rather than bypass it, that what they carry now has a specific and irreplaceable medicine in it. A medicine that cannot be manufactured, that cannot be learned from a book or absorbed from someone else's experience. That only comes from having genuinely needed it yourself. The people who are going to find you are not looking for someone who has it all together. They are looking for someone who has been somewhere similar to where they are and did not completely disappear. Someone who is honest enough about what it cost and faithful enough about what it built. Someone whose presence says, without words, this kind of hard is survivable, and something comes out the other side of it. That is the medicine you carry, and you could only have it because of what you went through. You are also becoming the light bearer, not someone who generates light from their own capacity. A light bearer is someone who carries light they did not produce themselves. Someone who received something in the dark, kept it lit, protected it through conditions that should have extinguished it, and now brings it into spaces where the dark has been so consistent and so long that people stopped believing light was even a real thing. You kept something lit through all of it. Whatever it was for you, the belief, the hope, the refusal to let the story end where it seemed like it might end, you kept something lit that should not, by any external measure, still be burning. And that light is going to matter enormously to the people who find you in the dark. And you are becoming the hope restorer. There are people in your world, coming into your world, who have stopped believing, not publicly. They still use the language. They still show up in the right places and say the right things. But somewhere inside, in the private place where the truest things live, the belief that something genuinely good is still possible for them has gone very quiet, almost silent, and they need evidence. Not an argument, not a theology, evidence. A living, breathing, honest, specific human being who went through something comparable and came out the other side with something more than before. Someone who does not have to be perfect, who does not have to have everything resolved, who just has to be real, and still here, and still carrying something worth finding. You are that evidence. You are already that evidence. And now I need to say, the thing that sits underneath all of this, the thing that recontextualizes not just this season, but every season, every moment of the battle, every night of the waiting, every almost letting go followed by the quiet, stubborn choice to hold on one more time. You did not become a receiver at the end of the battle. You were always a receiver. The battle did not create this identity. The battle could not create it. Identity this deep is not made by circumstances. It is revealed by them. The battle stripped away what did not belong to your deepest self, so that what does belong could become more fully visible. To you, to the people who will find you, to the purposes you were always designed to serve. The warrior was the layer, the receiver is the core. And everything the warrior did, every battle fought, and every line held, and every night of choosing faithfulness in conditions that did not reward it, all of that was in service of protecting the receiver underneath, in service of keeping the core alive long enough to arrive at the season where it could finally, fully emerge. And that season is now. This is not a season of preparation for something coming later. This is the season of becoming who you have always been, of the armor, doing what armor is supposed to eventually do, coming off gently, piece by piece, without shame, without a sense of loss, with the recognition that what it was protecting the whole time is extraordinary. And resting is not what you do while you wait for the real work to begin. Resting is the real work, because the real work of this season is the full emergence of the receiver, and the receiver cannot emerge in beta. The receiver cannot emerge in vigilance and scanning and constant output. The receiver emerges in gamma, in the stillness, in the allowing, in the gentle, persistent, courageous practice of being present to this moment without bracing against it. So let me say it one more time, the whole thing, the complete truth, the thing this entire message has been building toward. You are not a warrior learning how to rest. You are a receiver who had to become a warrior for a season. And that season is over. And your new assignment, the most sacred and the most difficult and the most important assignment you have ever been given, is not another campaign. It is not another level of endurance. It is not the next fight dressed up in the language of recovery. Your assignment is to receive what the whole story has been moving toward, to grieve what it cost, honestly and with dignity, to open to what is arriving without managing or bracing or holding it at arm's length, to discover who you are underneath the armor and let that person step fully into the light. To become, completely and unapologetically, the wounded healer who turns personal pain into medicine, the light bearer who kept something lit in the dark, the hope restorer who is evidence for everyone who has stopped believing. You were always this person. The battle just spent a very long time confirming it. And everything that was used against you, everything that came to take this from you, everything that pressed and prolonged and tested and cost and stretched beyond what seemed fair or reasonable or survivable, none of it succeeded. You are still here. The thing that was being protected is still intact. And now it is time to receive what that means. The deepest truth has landed, and now comes the part that actually matters for tomorrow morning. For the moment you wake up, and the ordinary weight of your ordinary day begins to press in. For the Tuesday and the Thursday, and the quiet Sunday afternoon, when the revelations of a message like this have faded a little at the edges, and you are left with just yourself, and the question of how to actually be in this new season. Because knowing who you are is not the same as living from who you are. The warrior is a deeply grooved habit. Years of practice have worn those grooves deep, and a truth, even a paradigm-shifting truth, even the kind that moves something real when it lands, does not automatically replace a habit. It gives you something better to return to when the habit tries to reassert. But the returning has to happen, repeatedly, consistently, with patience toward yourself when you discover, again, that the old groove pulled you back in without you noticing. So let me be very specific with you about what it looks like in practice, in real life, to move as a receiver rather than a warrior, not as a spiritual concept, as a lived daily reality. Because the gap between the concept and the practice is exactly where most people get stuck. And I do not want that for you. There are 5 observable shifts. 5 ways that a person moving from warrior identity into receiver identity begins to look and feel different to themselves and eventually to the people around them. I want to walk you through each one. The first shift is moving from striving to aligning. The warrior mode of engaging with life is forward pressure, constant forward pressure. The pushing, the making things happen, the generating of momentum through sheer will and effort. And there is a version of this that is genuinely virtuous. That is diligence. That is faithfulness. That is the refusal to be passive in the face of what matters. But there is another version that is really control wearing the clothes of diligence. It is the inability to trust that something can happen without you pushing it. The anxiety that if you stop pressing, the whole thing will stall. The compulsion to always be doing something toward the goal, even when the season is actually asking you to stop and wait for the door to open rather than trying to push through the wall. Aligning is different. Aligning is the practice of positioning yourself well and then trusting the movement. It is the difference between pushing a door open with your shoulder and simply turning the handle of a door that was never locked. The effort required is completely different, and the exhaustion left behind is completely different. What does this look like practically? It looks like making decisions from a place of genuine peace rather than from anxiety. It looks like asking, before you take an action, whether this action is coming from a real sense of rightness or from the fear of what happens if you do not act. It looks like being willing to wait a beat before the next move, to see if the next move actually needs to come from you, or whether something is already moving and your job is simply to step in. The receiver aligns. The warrior strives. And learning the difference between those 2 internal postures is one of the most practically significant things you can do in this season. The second shift is moving from guarding to discerning. The warrior guards everything equally, because in the battle, the cost of dropping your guard about the wrong thing was too high. So the default became, guard all of it, keep everything at a slight distance, maintain enough protective space around every relationship, every opportunity, every piece of goodness, that if it turns out to be something that cannot be trusted, the damage is limited. Discernment is different from guarding. Discernment is the active, present, attentive process of actually evaluating what is in front of you, rather than applying a blanket policy of caution to everything. Discernment says, let me look at this specifically. Let me sense into it. Let me notice what my deepest self, the one operating from gamma rather than beta, is actually registering about this person, or this situation, or this opportunity. Guarding keeps goodness out along with the threats. Discernment lets goodness in while remaining genuinely alert to what is not good. And the difference, though it sounds subtle, changes the entire quality of your daily experience. Because a life lived primarily from guarding is exhausting in a specific way. The exhaustion of never fully landing anywhere, never fully receiving anything, never fully allowing yourself to be in a moment without a portion of you on watch. You were built for discernment, not for perpetual guarding. And the practice of this shift is the practice of asking, in any given moment, whether the caution you are feeling is genuine wisdom about this specific thing, or whether it is the warrior running its default program. The third shift is moving from proving to trusting. The warrior carries, often without knowing it, a persistent, low-level need to demonstrate worth, to show that the season was justified, to produce something that confirms that the waiting was not in vain and the holding on was for something real, to make the contribution visible enough that the cost of it makes sense. And this need is understandable. It grew from a real place, from the experience of being overlooked or delayed or passed over in seasons when you were genuinely ready and genuinely positioned. The proving impulse is the response of a person who learned that their value is not automatically acknowledged and must therefore be consistently demonstrated. But the receiver does not need to prove worth. The receiver operates from a settled knowing that the assignment is real and the assignment speaks for itself. That what passes through them, the medicine and the light and the hope they carry, those things are self-evidencing. The people who need them will recognize them. And the people who do not recognize them are simply not the people they are for. Trusting means releasing the management of how you are received. It means doing what you do with full presence and genuine care, and then letting the impact be whatever it is for whoever it lands with. It means not tracking whether the output was sufficient, not measuring whether you gave enough or said the right thing or produced at the level the season required. Just showing up fully and trusting that showing up fully is enough. That is a significant surrender for someone who has spent years in warrior mode. But it is also, paradoxically, an enormous relief, because proving is exhausting and trusting is restful. Even when it is uncomfortable in the early stages, the fourth shift is moving from controlling the outcome to participating in the process. The warrior needs to know where things are going, needs to be able to track the trajectory, assess the progress, calculate whether the effort is producing the right result. Control of the outcome is how the warrior manages the gap between what they were promised and what they can currently see. Participation is different. Participation is showing up fully to the current moment, to the current relationship, to the current opportunity, with everything you have, and then releasing what that produces. Participating in the process means trusting that the process itself is moving somewhere, even when the somewhere is not yet visible, even when the trajectory is not yet calculable. The receiver shows up, does their part, and releases the result. Not because results do not matter, but because the obsessive management of results is one of the most effective ways to stay in beta, stay in warrior mode, and prevent the gamma state that allows the most powerful version of what you carry to actually flow. The receiver who trusts the process tends to produce more and better than the warrior who manages every variable. Because the receiver is fully present to what is actually happening, rather than partially present to the moment and partially managing the projection. The fifth shift is moving from managing the pace to honoring the rhythm. This one requires the most trust, because it asks you to operate according to a timing that is not your own. And for someone who has survived by maintaining control of their own pace, this is a particular kind of vulnerability. There is a rhythm in this season, not your rhythm. Not the rhythm of ambition or urgency or the feeling that you are already behind where you thought you would be by now. A deeper rhythm, a slower and more precise rhythm. The rhythm of formation, completing, of the vessel being readied, of the right connections moving into alignment before the next chapter opens. Honoring that rhythm means some days you do less than you feel capable of, not because you lack capacity, but because the season is not asking for your full capacity right now. It is asking for your full presence, your full receiving, your full willingness to let this chapter be what it is, without collapsing it into a transitional moment you need to get through as quickly as possible. The receiver does not rush the rhythm. The receiver learns to feel it, and moving with the rhythm rather than against it is one of the most counterintuitive and ultimately transformative practices available to you in this season. Now, I want to tell you something that I think is important to say before we move into the closing of this message, because everything I have just described, these 5 shifts, these new postures of moving as a receiver, they are not going to take hold immediately. And there is going to be a specific experience that catches most people off guard when they begin practicing them. The warrior will come back. Not as a dramatic return, not with an announcement, as a habit, as the familiar groove doing what familiar grooves do when the conditions quiet down and the new pattern has not yet had enough time to become equally automatic. It will feel like urgency returning, like the sudden pressing sense that you need to be doing something, that resting is falling behind, that the peace you have been allowing yourself is going to have consequences, that it is not safe to be this still. And when that happens, and it will happen, I want you to do something very simple. Name it, not out loud, not to anyone else, just internally. In the quiet of your own mind, say, this is the warrior, this is the old habit, this is the groove. And then, without self-criticism, without condemnation, without treating the return of the warrior as evidence that something has gone wrong in the recovery, gently choose again. Let it be. Let this moment be acceptable. Return to the receiver posture. Return to the aligning rather than striving. Return to the discerning rather than guarding. Return to the participating rather than controlling. And return without making yourself wrong for having drifted. Because the practice of returning, the repeated gentle returning to who you actually are, when the habit tries to pull you back to what you used to need to be, that returning is the work of this season. That is not failure. That is the exact thing the season is asking you to practice. And every single time you do it, you are deepening the groove of the receiver. You are making the new identity a little more automatic, a little more accessible, a little more the thing you return to by default. And one day, without being able to point to exactly when it happened, you will notice that the warrior is no longer the first response, that the gamma state is no longer the exception. That peace is no longer something you have to reach for. That receiving feels more natural than guarding. That the rhythm of this season has become your rhythm. That you have, gradually and faithfully, stepped fully into who you were always designed to be. That day is coming. And it is already beginning. Let me show you what that looks like from the other side, from the place of full integration, because I want you to have a picture of what you are moving toward. Not an idealized picture, not a version of yourself that never struggles or never has a hard day. The real picture of what it looks like when a receiver has fully inhabited their identity. Let me bring Joseph back one more time. Not in the pit, not in the prison, in the palace. Joseph governing is not what most people picture when they think of a person in significant authority. He is not the warrior king. He is not the aggressive, driving, dominating presence that the world tends to associate with power. What the text shows us is someone who moves with an extraordinary kind of groundedness, who makes decisions that affect an entire nation under enormous pressure, with enormous responsibility, without the reactivity of someone still in survival mode, who holds a long view even in moments of acute crisis, who has the capacity to see the larger pattern of what is happening when everyone around him is only seeing the immediate problem. That is not the warrior. That is the fully integrated receiver, someone who went through what it took to build that depth, who recovered from what the building cost, who allowed the formation of the in-between years to do its full work, and who now moves through the world from a place of settled, non-anxious authority. Not because life is without pressure. Joseph's governing years were full of pressure, but the pressure no longer runs him. He runs with the pressure. There is a difference. And the thing I want you to notice about Joseph in the palace is that he does not spend his governing years talking about the pit. He does not lead from the wound. He leads from what the wound built in him. The wisdom, the patience, the long view, the genuine humility that keeps authority from becoming corruption, those things are present in everything he does, but they are integrated. They are part of who he is now, not a wound he is managing. That is what full integration looks like. The hard seasons fully digested, the formation fully inhabited, the identity fully occupied. The contribution flowing from a place of genuine wholeness rather than from the fumes of survival. That is where you are going, and the recovery season, this season you are in right now, is the corridor between the battle and the palace, between the formation and the governing, between the person the battle made and the person the palace needs you to be. Do not rush the corridor. The corridor has its own work. The corridor has its own essential formation. And the person who runs through the corridor without stopping to receive what it is trying to give will arrive at the other side with the receiver's assignment, but still carrying the warrior's posture. And the warrior's posture in a receiver's assignment is one of the most common ways that significant callings get tangled and delayed and complicated far longer than they needed to be. Walk the corridor. Receive the corridor. Let the corridor do its full work in you. Because what is on the other side of it is worth inhabiting fully when you arrive, and you will arrive more fully if you do not skip what the corridor is trying to give. Now, I made you a promise early in this message. I said that before this message ended, I was going to speak something over your life, something specific, something I believe was part of the reason this message found you today, something that I have been building toward through every section, every story, every revelation we have walked through together. We are almost there. Everything we have covered in this message, the lag, the depletion, the grief, the 3 assignments, the 5 shifts, the warrior and the receiver, and the stories of the ones who walked this before you. All of it has been preparation for this final space, because what I want to speak over you in the closing is not a general blessing. It is not a scripted prayer designed to create a feeling. It is a specific, targeted, intentional declaration over the person you actually are, over the receiver who survived the battle, over the wounded healer and the light bearer and the hope restorer who are emerging in this season, over the formation that happened in the hard years, over the identity that was being protected underneath the armor the whole time. And I believe, with a certainty that I cannot fully explain, but that I have learned to trust, that what you receive in this closing space is part of why today's particular path brought you here. Come with me into it. Before I begin, I want to ask something of you. Set everything else down for a moment. If there is noise around you, let it be there. If your mind is still moving through everything this message has covered, let it move. You do not need to be in a perfect state to receive what is coming. You just need to be here, present, as you are, right now. Because what I am about to speak is not for the version of you that has everything together. It is for the version of you that showed up today, the one who is still in the middle of something, still holding questions that do not have clean answers yet, still in the corridor between the battle and the palace. That version, the real one. Before I do anything else, I want to begin with gratitude. Not the kind of gratitude that performs itself, the real kind. The kind that comes from actually acknowledging what you walked through and what you walked through it with, because you were not alone in it. In the longest nights, when it was just you and the ceiling and the same question you had been carrying for months, you were not alone. In the almost letting go moment, when the logic for releasing was right there and something in you chose to hold on anyway, you were not alone. In the quiet mornings when you got up and did the faithful thing again, even though nothing visible had changed, you were not alone. There was a presence in every one of those moments, moving in the margins of your experience, holding something you could not hold for yourself, keeping lit the thing that should by every external measure have gone dark. And I want to say thank you. On behalf of this space, on behalf of this message, on behalf of every element of your journey that gathered into this particular moment, thank you for staying, for holding on, for choosing one more time and then one more time after that to not let go of something you could not yet see but could not bring yourself to release. That faithfulness was seen, every moment of it, every quiet private choice, every night and every morning and every in-between moment where no one was watching and you did the faithful thing anyway. It was seen. And I want to acknowledge something else. I want to acknowledge what you actually carried through this season, not in general terms, with specificity. You carried the weight of believing in something your circumstances did not confirm. That is an enormous weight. Most people cannot sustain it past a few months. You carried it across seasons. You carried the loneliness of a calling that not everyone around you could understand or share. The particular aloneness of someone who perceives something others do not yet see and has to hold that perception without the validation of being recognized. You carried the grief of what the season cost. The relationships, the time, the simpler version of yourself, the plans that had to be released. You carried the grief often in silence, without ceremony, without anyone fully witnessing what was being set down. You carried the questions, the ones that did not resolve, the ones you learned to live with rather than answer. The deep, genuine, theologically honest questions of someone who takes both the promise and the delay seriously and refuses to choose easy comfort over real reckoning. And you carried hope through all of it. You carried the stubborn, costly, sometimes fragile, but never fully extinguished hope that the story was not finished, that the thing you were holding on for was real, that what you had been given to carry was worth the cost of carrying it. Every bit of that was seen, and every bit of that mattered. Now I want to speak into this space something that I believe this season is ready to release. I want to speak release over the things that have served their time and are ready to be set down. The weight of the warrior posture that protected you for so long, the constant readiness, the perpetual bracing, the scanning of every horizon for what might be coming next, it served you faithfully. It kept you functional in conditions that required it. And now I release it from the obligation of being your primary way of moving through the world. Release. The grief of the battle season, the real, legitimate, unperformed grief of what the years cost, the loss of the simpler self, the relationships that did not survive the season, the time that stretched longer than it should have stretched, the version of the future that had to be released so you could hold on, all of it, acknowledged, honored, dignified, release. The comparison, the measuring of your timeline against the timelines of people whose paths were not yours and whose formation did not require what yours required, the exhausting mathematics of feeling behind, the silent verdict of not yet that you have been carrying as if it were a permanent condition rather than a temporary season. Release. The unworthiness, The quiet, persistent voice that has suggested, in various disguises over the years, that the delay was evidence of a deficiency. That if you were more, believed more, were further along, had fewer rough edges, the breakthrough would already be here. That voice was not telling the truth. It was the voice of the battle, not the voice of the source. Release. The old ceiling. The internal limitation on how much goodness you allow yourself to believe is actually available to you. The unconscious cap on what you permit yourself to hope for, shaped by the distance between what you were given and what arrived. That ceiling does not belong in the season you are entering. Release. The fear of receiving, the vulnerability of allowing good things to arrive and actually land without immediately managing or bracing against the possibility of loss. The guardedness around your own joy, the restraint around your own rest, the slight pulling back from your own peace. Release. The exhausted version of yourself that kept showing up anyway, the one who was running on fumes and still chose faithfulness. That version deserves more than gratitude. That version deserves rest. And I release them now from the obligation of keeping the pace that season demanded. They have earned what is coming. Release. The old story of who you are, the one that was written in the language of what you have been through, rather than in the language of what you were always designed for. That story is not false. It is just incomplete. And I release it from being the primary narrative so that the truer and larger story can fully emerge. Release. And now I want to call forward what is being activated in this season. I call forward the receiver, the one who was always underneath the warrior, the one who was being protected through every layer of armor and every season of battle. The one designed not primarily to take ground, but to carry something extraordinary from a source larger than themselves into a world that genuinely needs it. I call that person fully forward now, fully present, fully visible, fully inhabiting the identity that has always been theirs. I call forward the wounded healer, the one who has been through something real enough to carry genuine medicine, the one whose personal history of needing healing is not a liability, but the very source of what makes what they carry irreplaceable. I call forward the capacity to turn what the battle cost into what the people who find you will be healed by, the willingness to be honest about the wound so that the medicine in it can reach the ones who need it. I call forward the light bearer, the one who kept something lit in conditions that should have extinguished it. I call forward that light now, fully. Not the guarded flicker of something carefully protected. The full, settled, generous shining of someone who knows what they carry and is no longer afraid to let it be seen. I call forward the courage to bring that light into spaces where the dark has been so consistent and so long that people stopped believing light was a real thing. I call forward the hope restorer, the one who will be evidence, living, breathing, honest, specific evidence that something good is still possible. The one whose presence in a room changes what people believe is available to them, whose story, told honestly and without performance, gives people back the permission to keep going. I call that forward now, in full, not as a future version, as who you already are. I call forward the divine connections that belong to this new season, the right people moving into position, the relationships that carry something the next chapter requires, the ones who will recognize what you carry because they have been carrying something that fits alongside it. I call them forward and release every barrier of timing that was holding them at a distance. I call forward the doors, the ones that were held closed while the formation was completing, the ones that are now aligned with who you actually are rather than with who you were still becoming. I call them open, not as a demand, as a recognition that what was being prepared on the other side of them is ready, and the one who was being prepared on this side is ready too. I call forward the frequency, the gamma state, the God-given, natural, original frequency of your brain and your soul returning to its rightful home. The state of clarity and creativity and strong intuition and the kind of settled calm that can hold significant things without being overwhelmed by them. I call it forward, and I call it home. Now, I want to speak protection over this season. I cover this recovery from the urgency that would rush it, from the internal and external voices that would tell you, this corridor is taking too long, and you should already be further along, and the stillness is a problem rather than a gift. I cover this season from that voice. Let it speak and find nothing to land on. I cover what is being built in you from premature exposure. The things taking shape in this recovery, the new identity emerging, the receiver finding their full footing, the formation completing in the corridor, I cover those things from being presented to the world before they are ready. There is a right time for the palace, and what is being formed right now deserves the protection of the process. I cover this season from self-sabotage, from the warrior reasserting at the moment of breakthrough, from the old habit of shrinking when expansion is the actual invitation, from the doubt that arrives precisely when the evidence for trusting is becoming most clear. I cover the emerging receiver from every mechanism, internal or external, that would pull them back into a posture the season no longer requires. And I cover the gamma frequency as it returns, the pathway back to the God-given state, the state of receiving and perceiving and creating from a place of genuine open connection. I cover that pathway. Let it widen. Let it become the primary frequency rather than the occasional visitor. Let the body remember what it feels like to operate from its original design. And now, I want to speak declarations over this space, and I want you to receive them, not passively, actively. Let each one land somewhere real in you, not as something being said at you, as something true being spoken over the truest part of you. You are not who the battle tried to make you. You are who the source always said you were. A receiver, a carrier, a vessel for something that this world genuinely needs, and that only you can carry in the specific way you carry it. The battle is behind you. What was fought for is yours. And your new assignment, the most sacred and the most important assignment of your entire journey, is to receive it fully, unapologetically, without managing or minimizing or holding it at arm's length. You are the wounded healer, the one whose personal history of needing healing is the very source of the medicine you carry. What it cost you is not a liability, it is the credential. And the people who need what you carry will recognize it because of, not in spite of, what you have been through. You are the light bearer, the one who kept something lit when the conditions said it should have gone out long ago. That light is real, that light is yours, and it belongs in the spaces where people have stopped believing something can still be bright. You are the hope restorer, the evidence that something good is still possible. The living, breathing, honest proof that a story that looked like it was ending badly was actually moving toward something that could not have been reached any other way. Not one day of the battle was wasted, not one night, not one prayer that seemed to go unanswered, not one moment of choosing to hold on when letting go would have been easier. All of it was moving somewhere. All of it was being used. All of it was in service of the person standing at this exact threshold right now. The warrior rests. The receiver rises. And everything that was intended to prevent this moment did not succeed. You are still here. What you were carrying is still intact, and the season you have been fighting your way toward is now the season you are standing in. It is done. It is sealed. We receive it. And so it is. One more thing before you go. I did not plan to say this, but I feel it strongly right now, and I want to honor that. The moment you walked into this recovery season, the moment you began to choose rest over striving and receiving over guarding, and the receiver's identity over the warrior's posture, something started happening that you cannot fully see yet. Something that is not primarily about you. The people who are going to find you in the next season, the ones who are going to receive what you carry, the ones whose hope is going to be restored by your willingness to be honest about what you went through and faithful about what you held on to. Those people are already being prepared. Their path toward you is already in motion, and what you are becoming in this recovery season is specifically what they are going to need when they arrive. Your rest is not selfish. Your rest is preparation for them. Every day you allow yourself to truly recover, truly receive, truly inhabit the receiver, rather than re-arming the warrior. You are becoming more fully the version of yourself that those people need to find. Not a polished version, not a completed version, the honest, integrated, genuinely healing version. That is the one who will reach them. So rest, not just for yourself. Rest, because the ones who are coming need what the rested receiver carries in a way that the exhausted warrior simply cannot provide. Your recovery is your ministry right now. Let that be enough. You are not the person you were when you pressed play on this message. Something has shifted. You may not feel the full weight of it yet. That is fine. The shift does not require your feelings to confirm it. It has happened in the deeper place, the place underneath the feelings, the place where the truest things take root and grow quietly before they become visible. Receive that. Now, if something in this message found a home in you today, if one truth, one moment, one declaration landed somewhere real and changed something in the way you understand yourself or this season, I want to ask you to do one thing. Type one word in the comments below this video. Just one word. The word that describes what this message gave you today. It could be anything. Peace, permission, seen, free, home, whatever is most true for you. I read those words, and your word matters to me, not as a metric, as a real communication between two people who both walked through something and found each other in this space today. There is also something I want to mention briefly for those who felt something when I spoke earlier about the gamma frequency, about the brain's God-given state being suppressed by the battle and the possibility of supporting its return. For those of you who felt a recognition in that, the link for the Genius song is in the description and in the pinned comment of this video. That is the only place where the genuine product, the one with the actual brain entrainment technology, the 4 bonuses, and the full money-back guarantee, can be accessed. Not through any search engine, not through any other platform, just that link. It is there when you are ready, with no pressure and no deadline. And if you know someone right now, someone specific, someone who has been in a long battle that has cost them more than they let on, someone who is holding on by a thread and needs the permission to stop fighting and start receiving, I want to ask you to share this message with them. Not because they need to be fixed, because they need to know they are not alone in what this particular kind of hard feels like. And because sometimes the most important thing a person in the middle of the battle can receive is the voice of someone who has walked something similar, saying, "The battle is real. What it cost is real." And there is something on the other side of it that the battle was protecting the whole time. Be that voice for someone today. Go rest, chosen one, not because the journey is finished, because you have earned this chapter, and in the resting, in the genuine, unapologetic, sacred resting, watch what begins to arrive. Watch what comes towards someone who has finally, fully opened